Hi, I'm Roy, and this is me doing the Autumn Amour readathon as invented by the Bookish Bryants and lots of other co-hosts as well, all detailed down in the description. So my week one was a Euromance, Yesterday's Affair by Sally Wentworth. So this is a Mills and Boon book, one of a series they did in 1992 to celebrate the Year of European Unity. They brought out one book for each of the European countries as shown on a handy map, and they also give us a map of the country where the particular story takes place. This one is United Kingdom, and great to have a map, but works for Tolkien, works for Mills and Boon, but not quite a big enough scale to follow the story. So that we can get the geography properly done, I've got some other geographical aids as well. So let me walk you, and a compass too. So don't worry, we're not going to get lost. So it's a romance set in the UK to do with European community as a sort of thing that was in the news at the time. And yes, right, so here's how it works. The heroine is Olivia Grant, a journalist who is American. And I've noticed, not read many romance books, but from extensive watching of Hallmark and Hallmark's type of romances, particularly at Christmas, I know that the journalist is a classic role for a romance character, probably because it gives them sort of mobility. They're not just tied to an office and they can do some cool stuff. So that's her. And 2 years ago, she had a torrid affair with a pilot, a guy called Nick Vaux. And you can see him on the cover wearing an extremely baggy leather blouse-on style pilot jacket. So a bit of an 80s vibe to Nick. They had an affair, but when he found out that she was technically still married, he went apo and walked away. But it's 2 years later, the present. I should say this is the contemporary and or historical week, so I'm counting it as both. It's contemporary because it was, at the time, this is when it was happening, as well as being historical artifacts of the 90s. Yes, right, so 2 years later, Olivia has an assignment to come and write about tourism stuff in the UK for her magazine. So she flies over to Heathrow, and then she's staying in a hotel in London and does some detective work to find out where Nick the pilot has got to. And she also, in a nice touch of period detail, plugs in a computer cum word processor in her hotel room, which, from what I can remember of computers as they were in 1992, would mean she'd have some pretty heavy baggage to carry with a computer set up in it. She also receives faxes as well, which is kind of cool. So she finds out that this Nick guy now runs a helicopter company in the Cotswolds. So she relocates up to Stratford-on-Avon. Okay, so here's where we are so far. Stratford-on-Avon, pretty much in the middle of the UK, depending how you define middle, and indeed how you define UK. So she's tracked down where his helicopter place is, and she shows up at his work, finds him, and he's got a peculiar limp that he didn't have before, and he's extremely cold and sort of shunning of her, so he just doesn't want to know. But she decides he must still love her anyway, and she is going to pursue him, and that's the action of the novel. And as part of her tourism assignment, one thing about the the journalist characters of romances is they seem to have unlimited expense accounts. So she charters one of his helicopters to fly her around to all of the places she wants to visit, with the stipulation that he personally has to do the flying. So this kind of jams them together, and they go to a whole bunch of places. And it's kind of like a sort of classic tourist board sort of thing, really. They go to Bourton-on-the-Water, very nice, Chipping Campden, Blenheim Palace. These are all places in the Cotswolds, so they kind of drain that dry. Warwick Castle, that's another one. So she's doing all this kind of heritage stuff, loving the oldie worldy landscapes, and they do. I was excited to see Stonehenge on the cover because I thought there might be some sort of mystical elements perhaps. They go down to Avebury, which has standing stones, and also to Stonehenge. Nothing really mystical happens, although she does buy some comedy water divining rods from a shop and uses them, but it's kind of ambiguous as to whether they've actually worked or not. So that happens, and he's still shunning her, and it's like, why? What's the matter? We don't know. Where else do they go? Oh yes, and she, as part of her what is basically stalking, she observes him at night. He goes to a big old crumbly stately home, and it appears he lives in a stately home on his own. So there's a bit of a mystery there. What's his deal? We know from a conversation I had that he was in a plane crash that killed his father, and that's why he's sort of generally miserable of outlook and doing helicopters instead of the flying he used to do. Okay, they go to Stroud, and they go all the way up to Lindisfarne, Holy Island, which is a big distance, cool tourism thing to do. I think if I was Sally Wentworth's editor, I would have said it's the UK one, so can you get them to go to all of the UK countries? That doesn't happen, but they do go all the way up to Lindisfarne, which, as well as being an interesting place to visit, also the length of travel and bad weather create some jeopardy and a plot point. So when they arrive back, just clocking the flight plan here, it's too misty for her to go home, so she has to stay overnight in the crumbly stately home. And then it all goes a bit sort of Beauty and the Beast. So at night she creeps into his bedroom. Like I say, if the genders were reversed, this would be well weird. Creeps into his bedroom and sees that he has scars, burn scars all over his body. And he wakes up and he's all like, sort of, no, you have seen my scars, no woman can love me. And she's like, no, but Nick, it doesn't matter. And he's like, yes, but you recoiled when you saw them. And she's like, no, it was the recoil of empathy. But that doesn't really cut any ice, so they're still sort of at odds. We still don't quite know. Also, he begins to hint that because of these mystery injuries, he can't actually have sex anymore. Now, Mills and Boon novels, lost the book. They do have sex in it, kind of alluded to. In fact, the editor of Mills and Boon, who was a sort of a god of romance, promises that the romance simply sizzles. And the word sizzle and sizzling is kind of Mills and Boon code for the sexy aspects of the books. So it's getting near the end of the book. So if Nick isn't going to deliver on the sizzling, where's it going to come from? You know, there aren't really many other candidates. I think there was a cab driver at the beginning, but there really aren't other characters around. So they fly off to Brighton, and they get out and wander around my hometown and go shopping in the lanes. which is good. And then they're back in Stratford-on-Avon. She's got an invite to the opening of a Shakespeare play, and is trying to persuade him to come, and he's saying, this is the night I'm going to seduce him. In a diligent moment of the European theme, European community officials are amongst the guests at this opening night, which we hope they enjoyed it, because they can't come anymore. So that happens, and then they do get together, and it turns out everything's working okay, and in fact they have rampaging sex in multiple bedrooms in this stately home. She's going to live and stay there. They're going to do the stately home up, turn it into a college for sort of aspiring Shakespearos, and he also there is a character called Nicholas Vaux in Shakespeare, in Henry VIII's play. She says was probably part of his family. So basically they end up, they've spent the whole book looking at the heritage industry of England, and they end up part of that heritage industry and part of the history. The final line is about a picture of Shakespeare apparently winking at Olivia. So they sort of, this is the United Kingdom romance, and they end up embedded in the United Kingdom itself, which is great. And looking forward to reading more of these Euromances, but it will be a tough one to beat, I would say. So that was this week. Next week is sweet and or spicy. I decided to go for sweet. I've read an Amish romance, and that was quite brief, so I moved on to a Quaker romance, and I've also just about started on a Shaker romance. So next week it will be religious group romances. Less sex, more sects.